In October 2024, vintage photography collector Amanda Richardson was browsing through Morrison's antique shop in downtown Portland, Oregon, when she discovered a collection of early 20th century family portraits tucked away in a dusty corner cabinet. The shop owner, elderly Ernest Morrison, explained that the photographs had come from an estate sale in Seattle, part of a larger collection that had been stored in an attic for decades. Most of the photographs were typical examples of formal family portraiture from the 1910s. Stern-faced patriarchs, elegantly dressed matrons, and children posed with the rigid formality expected of the era. However, one particular image immediately caught Richardson's attention, not because it followed the typical somber conventions of the time, but because it seemed to radiate genuine warmth and happiness. The photograph, professionally mounted and bearing the embossed mark Stevens Portrait Studio, Seattle, Washington, 1912, showed what appeared to be an ideal American family gathered in their home's well-appointed parlor. The scene depicted the prosperity and optimism of pre-World War I America, with the family's clothing and surroundings reflecting the comfortable lifestyle of the emerging middle class. At first glance, the portrait seemed to capture a moment of genuine familial joy. The mother, a woman in her early 30s, sat gracefully in an ornate chair, her arm around her young daughter who beamed with childlike delight. Two sons, aged approximately 8 and 10, stood nearby with bright, natural smiles that suggested this was a family genuinely happy to be together. But as Richardson examined the photograph more closely under the shop's magnifying glass, she noticed something deeply unsettling about the father's expression. While his wife and children displayed authentic joy and contentment, the man's smile carried a quality that made Richardson's skin crawl. There was something predatory, calculating, and utterly cold about his expression that seemed completely at odds with the warmth radiating from the rest of his family. Richardson purchased the photograph, unable to shake the feeling that she had discovered evidence of something far more sinister than a simple family portrait. That disturbing smile would soon lead to one of the most shocking revelations in the history of American criminal investigation. Back in her studio, Richardson examined the 1912 photograph under professional lighting and high-resolution magnification. What she discovered about the father's expression became more disturbing with each detail she uncovered. While his family members displayed genuine, spontaneous joy, his smile appeared rehearsed, calculated, and profoundly menacing. Richardson contacted Dr. James Parker, a forensic psychologist who specialized in analyzing criminal behavior through historical photographs and documents. Dr. Parker had developed techniques for identifying personality disorders and criminal tendencies in vintage images, often assisting law enforcement agencies in cold case investigations. Dr. Parker's initial analysis was immediately alarming. This man's facial expression displays classic indicators of psychopathic behavior, he reported. While his family shows authentic emotional connection, his smile is purely performative. Look at his eyes. They're completely cold, calculating. This is someone who views other people as objects to be manipulated rather than human beings to be loved. The psychological evaluation revealed additional disturbing details. The father's posture suggested dominance and control over his family members, with his hands positioned in ways that seemed possessive rather than protective. His smile, when examined closely, didn't engage the muscles around his eyes that typically indicate genuine happiness. Instead, it appeared to be a carefully constructed mask designed to hide his true nature. Most troubling was what Dr. Parker identified as predatory focus in the man's gaze. "He's not looking at the camera like the others," Parker explained. "His attention seems fixed on something or someone outside the frame, and his expression suggests he's contemplating something that gives him satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction that should concern us deeply." Richardson began researching the photograph's origins, starting with the Stevens Portrait Studio in Seattle. What she discovered through city records and historical archives painted the picture of a family that had successfully maintained a facade of respectability while hiding secrets that had remained buried. For over 110 years, the investigation would soon reveal that the father's disturbing smile had captured a moment of barely concealed malevolence that would finally, more than a century later, expose the truth about one of Seattle's most successful serial predators. The man's smile in that 1912 photograph was about to reveal crimes that had been hidden behind a mask of family respectability for generations. Richardson's research into the 1912 photograph led her to identify the family as the Hartwells of Seattle. Harold Hartwell had been a successful insurance broker who owned a large agency in downtown Seattle, employing dozens of agents and serving some of the city's most prominent businesses and wealthy individuals. The family lived in one of Seattle's finest neighborhoods and was actively involved in local society, church activities, and charitable organizations. Contemporary newspaper accounts from 1912 portrayed Harold Hartwell as a pillar of the community. He served as a deacon at First Presbyterian Church, donated generously to local orphanages, and was frequently mentioned in business publications as an example of entrepreneurial success. His wife, Ruth Hartwell, was active in women's charitable societies and was known for her gracious hosting of social events that raised funds for various causes. The Hartwell children, Margaret, age 12, William, age 10, and Robert, age 8, appeared to be thriving members of Seattle's social elite. They attended the city's most prestigious private schools, participated in youth programs at their church, and were frequently mentioned in society pages for their achievements in academics and social activities. However, Richardson noticed troubling gaps in the public record that became more apparent the deeper she researched. While Harold Hartwell's business success was well documented, there were unusual patterns in his client relationships and business practices that suggested something darker beneath his respectable facade. Richardson consulted with Dr. Lisa Chen, a historian specializing in Pacific Northwest business history, to help understand Harold Hartwell's professional life. Chen's research revealed that Hartwell's insurance agency had an unusually high rate of policy claims involving young women and children, particularly cases involving accidents, disappearances, and unexplained deaths. The statistical pattern is highly unusual, Chen observed. Hartwell's agency handled a disproportionate number of life insurance claims involving vulnerable populations, orphans, domestic workers, young women without family connections. For a reputable businessman, he seemed remarkably attracted to insuring people who had few advocates or protectors. More disturbing was the discovery that several of Hartwell's clients had disappeared entirely after purchasing policies through his agency. Between 1908 and 1915, at least 12 young women who had bought insurance from Hartwell vanished without a trace, leaving behind unclaimed policies and no forwarding addresses. The investigation was beginning to suggest that Harold Hartwell's predatory smile in the 1912 photograph had captured something far more sinister than business success. It may have revealed the satisfaction of a serial killer who used his respectable position to hunt victims. Richardson's investigation took a darker turn when she began researching the disappearances connected to Harold Hartwell's insurance agency. Working with Seattle's historical crime database, she identified a pattern of missing persons cases from 1908-1915 that centered around young women who had all purchased life insurance policies from Hartwell's agency shortly before vanishing. The missing women shared troubling similarities. All were between ages 16 and 25. All were new to Seattle with few local connections. And all were employed in domestic service or similar occupations that made them economically vulnerable. Most significantly, all had been convinced to purchase substantial life insurance policies by Harold Hartwell personally, despite their modest incomes, making such policies financially impractical. Richardson discovered that Seattle police had investigated several of these disappearances at the time, but the cases had gone cold due to lack of evidence and witnesses. The investigating officers had noted the connection to Hartwell's insurance agency, but Harold's prominent social position and charitable reputation had deflected serious suspicion. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a criminal historian specializing in early 20th century serial crimes, helped Richardson analyze the pattern. Hartwell was using his legitimate business as a hunting ground, Martinez explained. He targeted vulnerable women, gained their trust through his respectable appearance and professional position, then made them disappear after ensuring he would profit from their deaths. The investigation revealed that Harold Hartwell had developed a sophisticated method for selecting and approaching potential victims. He would identify young women who were new to the city, often through contacts at employment agencies, boarding houses, and domestic service referral networks. He would then approach them with offers of insurance protection, presenting himself as a concerned businessman looking out for vulnerable workers. Richardson found police reports showing that families of missing women had repeatedly tried to interest authorities in Harold Hartwell, but their concerns had been dismissed due to his social standing. One report from 1913 documented a mother from Portland searching for her missing daughter, who had last been seen meeting with a well-dressed insurance salesman in downtown Seattle. Most chilling was the discovery that Harold had been named as beneficiary on several of the policies purchased by women who later disappeared. When questioned by police, he claimed the women had named him beneficiary because they had no family connections and trusted him as their insurance provider. The authorities had accepted this explanation without serious investigation. The 1912 family photograph now took on even more sinister significance, potentially capturing Harold Hartwell's satisfaction at the success of his predatory scheme while surrounded by the family that provided his perfect cover. Richardson's investigation deepened when she gained access to Harold Hartwell's business records, preserved in Seattle's historical business archives. The detailed documentation of his insurance agency's operations from 1905 to 1920 revealed the full scope of his predatory activities and the systematic nature of his crimes. The business ledgers showed that Harold had created a separate category of clients he privately labeled as special accounts, policies sold exclusively to young, unconnected women with no local family ties. These accounts were handled personally by Harold, never delegated to his employees, and were processed through paperwork that was kept separate from the agency's regular files. Most damning was the discovery of Harold's private correspondence files, which contained letters he had written to colleagues in other cities, apparently building a network of similar predators. In a letter to an associate in Portland, dated March 1913, Harold wrote, "The insurance business provides excellent opportunities for meeting vulnerable individuals who trust professional men. With proper cultivation, such relationships can prove quite profitable." Richardson found evidence that Harold had been systematically defrauding his own insurance company by filing false death claims for women who had actually been murdered. He would wait appropriate periods after their disappearances, then file death certificates claiming natural causes or accidents, collecting substantial payouts as the named beneficiary. The business records also revealed that Harold had been blackmailing some of his legitimate clients, using information gathered during policy applications to extort money from individuals with secrets they wanted kept hidden. His private notes contained references to additional income streams from clients who were particularly motivated to maintain their privacy. Dr. Robert Kim, a forensic accountant specializing in historical financial crimes, analyzed Harold's records and estimated that he had stolen over $200,000 between 1908 and 1915, equivalent to approximately $5 million today, through insurance fraud, blackmail, and theft from victims. Hartwell was running multiple criminal enterprises simultaneously, Kim reported. He was committing serial murder for profit, insurance fraud, blackmail, and probably theft from victims' personal effects. His legitimate business was just a front for an extensive criminal operation. The investigation also revealed that Harold had been planning to expand his operations, with business correspondence showing he had been considering opening satellite offices in other Pacific Northwest cities. His criminal enterprise had been growing systematically when something apparently interrupted his plans in 1915. The 1912 photograph now represented the height of Harold Hartwell's criminal success, capturing his satisfaction at operating a murder-for-profit scheme while maintaining the perfect facade of family respectability. Richardson's investigation took a personal turn when she discovered Ruth Hartwell's private diary, preserved in the estate collection where the photograph had been found. The diary, covering the years 1910-1916, provided an insider's perspective on Harold's behavior and revealed growing suspicions within his own household about his true nature. Ruth's early diary entries portrayed a woman increasingly disturbed by her husband's secretive behavior and unexplained absences. In an entry from September 1912, just months after the family photograph was taken, Ruth wrote, "Harold has been staying out late several evenings each week, claiming business meetings, but I've discovered he's not where he says he'll be. When questioned, he becomes angry and accuses me of not trusting him." The diary revealed that Ruth had begun noticing disturbing changes in Harold's personality around 1911. She described mood swings, periods of unusual excitement followed by dark depressions, and an increasing tendency toward controlling behavior with the children. Most troubling were her observations about Harold's reaction to news of missing persons cases in local newspapers. "Harold seems unusually interested in stories about missing women," Ruth wrote in February 1913. "He reads these accounts with an intensity that makes me uncomfortable, and sometimes I catch him smiling while reading about their disappearances. When I ask about his interest, he claims it's professional concern about insurance fraud, but his expression suggests something else entirely." The diary documented Ruth's growing awareness that her husband was hiding significant aspects of his life from the family. She had discovered unexplained money in Harold's personal accounts, clothing that smelled of unfamiliar perfumes, and jewelry hidden in his office that she had never seen him purchase. Most significantly, Ruth had begun receiving visits from families searching for missing daughters who had last been seen with Harold. Her diary recorded multiple instances of desperate parents coming to the Hartwell home, begging for information about their lost children who had purchased insurance from Harold before vanishing. A mother from Tacoma came to the house today, weeping and asking about her daughter who disappeared after meeting Harold about insurance. Ruth wrote in April 1914, "Harold was furious that she had come to our home and forbade me from speaking with her, but I could see in her eyes the same fear that has been growing in my heart." The diary revealed that Ruth had considered taking her children and leaving Harold, but felt trapped by social expectations and financial dependence. Her final entries from 1916 showed a woman living in terror of her own husband while trying to protect her children from a truth she was afraid to fully confront. The 1912 family photograph now took on additional layers of meaning, capturing not just Harold's predatory satisfaction, but also the beginning of his family's growing awareness that they were living with a monster. Richardson's investigation revealed the profound impact Harold Hartwell's criminal behavior had on his children through school records, medical files, and personal accounts that painted a picture of a family living in fear despite their outward appearance of prosperity and happiness. School records from Seattle's prestigious Lakeside Academy, where the Hartwell children attended, documented a disturbing pattern of behavioral problems that began around 1913, shortly after the family photograph was taken. Margaret Hartwell, the eldest at 12, had begun displaying symptoms that would today be recognized as severe anxiety and depression. Teachers' reports described Margaret as increasingly withdrawn, prone to violent outbursts, and unable to concentrate on her studies. A note from her teacher in 1914 read, "Margaret appears to be under tremendous stress at home. She flinches when adults approach her and has mentioned being afraid of her father. She seems particularly disturbed by any discussion of missing persons or violent crimes." The school records showed that both boys, William and Robert, had also begun exhibiting troubling behaviors. William had become aggressive toward younger students and was frequently found alone, refusing to participate in group activities. Robert, the youngest, had developed what school officials described as nervous conditions, including stammering, nightmares, and an inability to be left alone with male authority figures. Richardson discovered medical records showing that Ruth Hartwell had consulted with Dr. Edmund Foster, a prominent Seattle physician, about her children's deteriorating emotional health. Dr. Foster's notes, preserved in medical archives, documented his growing concerns about the family's domestic situation. Mrs. Hartwell brought her children for evaluation of what she termed nervous disorders. Dr. Foster wrote in 1914, "All three children display symptoms consistent with exposure to domestic violence or traumatic events. They are particularly fearful when their father is mentioned, and the eldest daughter has made concerning statements about bad things Daddy does to ladies." The medical records revealed that Margaret had told Dr. Foster about witnessing her father bringing women to their home during times when Ruth was away, and hearing crying and screaming from the basement. When Dr. Foster attempted to question Harold about these reports, Harold had abruptly ended the children's medical care and found a new physician who asked fewer questions. Richardson also found evidence that the children had confided in domestic staff about their fears. Mary O'Brien, who worked as the family's cook from 1912 to 1915, had kept detailed records of her employment that included disturbing observations about the household. The children were terrified of their father, especially young Margaret, O'Brien wrote. She would hide when he came home and had nightmares about women crying in the basement. Master William once told me he had seen his father burying things in the back garden at night. The investigation revealed that all three Hartwell children had suffered lasting psychological damage from their exposure to their father's crimes, with none of them achieving normal adult lives despite their privileged upbringing. Following Mary O'Brien's account of suspicious activity in the Hartwell family basement and backyard, Richardson contacted Seattle city officials about investigating the former Hartwell property, which had been converted into condominiums in the 1970s. Ground-penetrating radar scans of the basement and former garden areas revealed anomalies that suggested hidden burial sites. With permission from current property owners and coordination with Seattle Police Department's Cold Case Unit, excavation began in November 2024. What investigators discovered beneath the Hartwell family basement validated the most horrifying suspicions about Harold's criminal activities. The basement excavation revealed a hidden chamber behind a false wall, containing the skeletal remains of 7 women ranging in age from 16 to 25. Each skeleton showed evidence of violent death, with trauma patterns suggesting torture before murder. Personal effects found with the remains included jewelry, hair combs, and clothing fragments that helped investigators begin identifying the victims. Dr. Patricia Chen, the forensic anthropologist leading the examination, determined that the murders had occurred over a period of several years, with the earliest death estimated around 1909 and the most recent around 1915. The systematic nature of these crimes is staggering, Chen reported. Each victim appears to have been held captive for extended periods before being killed. The garden excavation revealed additional burial sites containing partial remains and personal belongings from at least 5 more victims. Among the recovered items were insurance policy documents bearing Harold Hartwell's signature, providing direct evidence linking him to the murders. Most disturbing was the discovery of a makeshift torture chamber in the basement's hidden section, complete with restraints, tools designed to inflict pain, and a drainage system that had been installed to dispose of evidence. The sophistication of the setup indicated that Harold had been planning and executing murders on his own property for years while his family lived upstairs. Richardson's investigation had uncovered physical evidence of what was potentially one of the most prolific serial murder cases in early 20th century American history. The basement chamber also contained Harold's personal trophies from his victims, photographs, jewelry, and personal items that he had kept as souvenirs of his crimes. The discovery validated every suspicion raised by the missing persons cases and explained the terrified behavior of Harold's children, who had been living directly above a serial killer's torture chamber while maintaining the facade of a happy, respectable family. The 1912 family photograph now represented one of the most chilling pieces of evidence ever discovered. showing a serial killer's satisfaction at his successful crimes, while surrounded by the family that had unknowingly provided his perfect cover. The discovery of Harold Hartwell's basement torture chamber sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across the Pacific Northwest, prompting investigations into similar missing persons cases in other cities where Harold had business connections. The scope of his criminal enterprise proved to be far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Seattle Police Department's Cold Case Unit, working with FBI historians, began cross-referencing Harold's business travel records with unsolved disappearances throughout Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. The pattern that emerged suggested Harold had been operating a traveling murder enterprise, using business trips to hunt victims in multiple cities while maintaining his respectable Seattle base of operations. Detective Maria Rodriguez, leading the modern investigation, coordinated with historical researchers to identify additional victims. We're looking at potentially 50 or more murders across a 7-year period, Rodriguez reported. Harold Hartwell may have been one of America's most prolific serial killers, operating completely under the radar, due to his social position and legitimate business. Cover. The investigation revealed that Harold had been part of a network of predators who shared information and techniques through their professional associations. Letters found in his business files contained coded communications with contacts in Portland, San Francisco, and Vancouver, suggesting a coordinated criminal enterprise that had never been previously detected. Most significantly, the investigation uncovered evidence explaining Harold's sudden disappearance from Seattle in 1915. Ruth Hartwell's diary contained final entries revealing that she had discovered her husband's crimes and had contacted authorities, leading to Harold fleeing the city to avoid arrest. "I can no longer remain silent about Harold's activities," Ruth wrote in her final diary entry from December 1915. "I have contacted Detective Morrison at Seattle Police with information about the missing women and what I've discovered in our basement. Harold must face justice for what he's done, regardless of the cost to our family's reputation." Seattle Police archives from 1916 contained a missing persons report filed by Ruth Hartwell, reporting that her husband had disappeared after she confronted him about her discoveries. Harold had apparently fled in the middle of the night, abandoning his family and business to avoid prosecution. The investigation traced Harold's movements after leaving Seattle, revealing that he had continued his criminal activities under assumed identities in California and Mexico before apparently dying in 1923 under suspicious circumstances that suggested he may have become a victim of his own criminal associates. Ruth Hartwell had spent the remainder of her life trying to help authorities identify Harold's victims and provide justice for their families, while struggling to protect her children from the stigma of their father's crimes. The 1912 family photograph had captured the peak moment of Harold Hartwell's criminal success, just 3 years before his wife's courage would finally expose his decades of murder and bring his reign of terror to an end. More than 110 years after Harold Hartwell's crimes were committed, the investigation Richardson had initiated brought unprecedented closure to dozens of families whose ancestors had vanished without explanation. The physical evidence discovered in the Hartwell basement provided definitive answers to missing persons, cases that had haunted Pacific Northwest communities for over a century. The Seattle Police Department held a press conference announcing the resolution of what they termed the largest cold case, breakthrough in department history. Detective Rodriguez presented evidence linking Harold Hartwell to at least 37 confirmed murders across 4 states, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American criminal history. DNA analysis of the recovered remains, combined with genealogical research, enabled authorities to identify most of Harold's victims and notify their surviving family members. For many families, the discovery provided the first answers they had ever received about ancestors who had simply vanished from family histories. Margaret Sullivan, great-granddaughter of one of Harold's victims, attended the press conference where authorities announced the identifications. "Our family had always wondered what happened to Great-Aunt Catherine when she moved to Seattle in 1913, Sullivan said. "Knowing the truth is painful, but finally, having answers after more than a century brings some peace." The Harold Hartwell case prompted significant changes in how law enforcement agencies investigate historical crimes. The success of Richardson's photograph analysis led to the creation of new protocols for examining vintage images for evidence of criminal behavior, with several other cold cases being reopened based on similar photographic analysis. The Hartwell family property was converted into a memorial garden, honoring Harold's victims, with individual monuments for each identified woman who had lost her life to his crimes. The memorial's inscription read, "In memory of the women whose lives were stolen, whose disappearances were ignored, and whose voices were silenced. Their courage lives on in the pursuit of justice." Ruth Hartwell was posthumously honored by the Seattle Police Department for her courage in exposing her husband's crimes, despite the personal and social costs. Her diary became a crucial historical document used in training programs for domestic abuse counselors and law enforcement officers dealing with family violence cases. The 3 Hartwell children, whose traumatic childhoods had been finally validated by the investigation, were remembered as survivors who had lived with the knowledge of their father's crimes while being unable to speak about their experiences due to the social constraints of their era. Richardson reflected on the profound impact of her discovery. When I first noticed that disturbing smile in the photograph, I never imagined it would lead to solving one of history's most extensive serial murder cases. It proves that truth has a way of surfacing, even after more than a century of being buried. The 1912 family portrait that had seemed to show a happy, successful family now served as one of the most important pieces of evidence in American criminal history, with Harold Hartwell's predatory smile serving as a permanent reminder of how evil can hide behind the most respectable facades. The photograph had finally given voice to Harold's victims, ensuring that their stories would never again be forgotten and that justice, however long delayed, had finally been served.